The United States and Iran have been isolated from one another since the Islamic Revolution of 1979. This mistrust has deep roots. Iranians have long complained of a history of U.S. interference in their affairs and of America's role in overthrowing an Iranian government during the Cold War. On the other hand, Americans see an Iranian government that has declared the United States an enemy and directly or through proxies taken American hostages, killed U.S. troops and civilians, and threatened our ally Israel with destruction.
And welcome back to the Steve Malzberg Show. Ladies and gentlemen, we are joined right now by our friend Clare Lopez of the ClarionProject.org, actually ClarionProject.org, also former CIA agent. Hey, Clare, how are you?
Hi, Steve. Good to be with you again.
Well, it's great to talk to you, and there's so much to get to, but let's start with the soundbite we just heard, and that is President Obama at the UN today reaching out to Iran, basically, and this is, out of everything he said, that's the bite that struck me, you know, standing there and saying, well, you know, Iran doesn't like us because they view us as blah, 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 and then lists their grievances. And we don't trust them because blah, 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 blah. And basically the way I interpreted it was, and I'm just a civilian, was he's kind of putting us on equal footing. They have a right to be a little, trepidatious. We have a right to be a little skeptical. I mean, this is insane.
It's absolutely insane, Steve. His words put us in some kind of moral equivalence. And there is absolutely zero moral equivalence between the United States of America and the #1 state sponsor of terror in the world, Iran, responsible for umpteen different terrorist group support to umpteen different terrorist groups, co-responsible with Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah for the attacks of 9/11, the human rights abuses that regime has perpetrated against its own people at home for 34 years, the pursuit of a nuclear weapon capability. There's no moral equivalence here.
No, and now, you know, whether the president, you know, meets with or shakes hands or doesn't or whatever, nonetheless, the counterpart to John Kerry apparently is going to be at a meeting with the permanent members of the Security Council talking about nuclear weapons. So that's going to be historic in and of itself. And but I mean, Iran is giving nothing. Even if we wipe the nuclear weapon issue off the table, which I don't think we ever can, everything the president said as far as our problems with Iran still happens to be true. They still threaten to wipe Israel off the map. They support Hezbollah. Yesterday they reaffirmed their support for Hamas. The whole thing is nuts.
It's absolutely crazy. We are not acting, our leadership is not acting in the best interest of United States national security or that of our closest friends and allies in the region like Israel. Absolutely not.
Now, there's a video on the Clarion on ClarionProject.org. Uranium, right?
Yes, Uranium is a film produced by the Clarion Project. I have a small part in it, as do numerous other experts on Iran. And it's about the Iranian nuclear weapons program, the drive for a deliverable nuclear weapons capability, which I would suggest, by the way, sanctions have accelerated the Iranian drive to reach whatever objective they are going for, however many warheads they want. I think the sanctions are causing them to double down and speed up that program. And if you look at recent IAEA reports, International Atomic Energy Agency reports about the program, there's no getting around the fact that the Iranians are producing more enriched uranium to higher levels of enrichment. They have worked on warhead triggers. They have worked on the warhead design itself. And, of course, they've worked together with North Korea on the missile delivery system for those weapons. So
what would you suggest, Clare, if the sanctions are, in effect, backfiring? What would you suggest?
I think what we should have done a long, long time ago, and that is declare our support for the Iranian people, to declare United States government support for the Iranian people who seek their own liberty and democracy. When they rose up in 2009 against the fraudulent election of previous President Ahmadinejad, We ignored them. We let them be slaughtered in the streets. They were begging for our support, even moral support, diplomatic support, verbal support, not to mention other kinds of support we could have given them, communications assistance, and other ways of helping them logistically to stand up to their own regime and gain their own liberty.
We're talking to Clare Lopez, former CIA agent, and of course she's with ClarionProject.org here on the Steve Malzberg Show. One more on Iran, and that is that Benjamin Netanyahu is warning that this whole thing with President Rouhani is just a honey trap. I mean, I saw Wolf Blitzer earlier say, he just tweeted out a picture of him driving to the UN. Oh, he's on Twitter. Oh, I mean, it's like, it's unbelievable. But Netanyahu and the Israelis are saying, don't buy this. But it doesn't seem to be sinking into the president.
Well, I think the Israelis, of course, being much geographically closer to Iran than we are, have to have a hard-headed, realistic perspective on things. And of course, the new president, Hassan Rouhani, is a regime insider for all of these years, since the beginning of this regime, 1979. He is the ultimate, he is the consummate regime insider. He bragged to the world that when he was nuclear negotiator, that those negotiations helped Iran to buy time, to promote, to pursue its nuclear program. This is not a reformer. This is not a moderate. This is an insider of the Iranian regime who's got as much blood on his hands, not to mention, by the way, when he was National Security Council member in Iran, partly responsible for the decision that body took to conduct the bombings in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, 1992, against the Israeli embassy, 1994, against the Jewish Cultural Center. He's part of that history.
Yeah, and also the other day, I forget who was interviewing him, but he would not denounce I think it was Ann Curry, maybe, when she went in the full Habib and all that, Hajib, and she asked him about the Holocaust deniers, and would he denounce the Holocaust deniers, and he would not. So I mean, but what do you expect when we have a president who supports a guy like Morsi, who not only by his actions, but even before that, his words calling Jews pigs and apes?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, that is straight out of the Quran. Multiple times it is written there. And you hear the leadership of the Iranian regime likewise saying the very same things, just absolutely dehumanizing Jewish people on a constant basis in the concept, in the framework of threatening genocide. I mean, they are guilty of breaking, of violations against the United Nations Convention on Genocide, against genocide. Consistently repeating threats to wipe Israel off the map. But more fundamentally, this is the Islamic Jihad threat against the Jewish people that comes straight out of the Quran.
Yep. Well, now let's quickly shift to Al-Shabaab and Kenya. Today we have Kenya's president saying that his military has ashamed and defeated the Islamist militants inside the mall. But of course, I think there was a piece I saw on your website, ClarionProject.org, that it's the state sponsors that make attacks like Nairobi possible for Al-Shabaab.
I honestly, in the case of Al-Shabaab, I think it's less a case of state sponsors than it is their connection to Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, specifically that cross the Gulf of Aden connection to Yemen and AQAP, which is headquartered in Yemen. There are weapons and fighters flowing in both directions across that Gulf towards AQAP in Yemen, and from there to the Horn of Africa, where Somalia is located, as well as I think there are weapons coming from places, yes, like Iran and like Eritrea. But the most important thing I think we have to realize is that Al-Shabaab is Al-Qaeda. It is not only over there in the Horn of Africa either. It has links through the immigrant populations in North America, both Canada and the United States. Among those immigrant populations, Al-Shabaab is present and recruiting actively among young American and Canadian Somali men with passports from our countries, meaning they can come and go. This is a serious threat we have to be cognizant of.
What role do you think the Israelis, commandos or commando leaders, whether they actually put on masks and went in, what role do you think the Israelis played in securing this mall?
Well, we did hear some media reports that both Israeli commandos and perhaps British commandos as well took part, at least in an advisory role, to help the Kenyans finally bring to an end this 4-day standoff with these jihadist attackers inside the mall, this upscale Westgate Mall in Nairobi, Kenya.
All right. Claire, fascinating to talk to you as always. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. Clare Lopez, ladies and gentlemen, former CIA agent. Now you can find her at clarionproject.org here on the Steve Malzberg Show. Lots to talk about there. Should the president be outreaching to the president of Iran? Should he stand at the United Nations and say, well, here's why Iran doesn't trust us, and then he lists their grievances, in effect saying, you got a point. I mean, what kind of president is this? 855-777-9660. What do you think? On the Steve Malzberg Show, Newsmax TV and radio.
The Steve Malzberg Show.